on the platform. Gosh, I'm getting some really interesting feedback on that interview. And I just want to make this observation. That was a long interview, and I asked quite pointed and specific questions. Well, a couple, he wasn't going to get into the Nats not backing him. He didn't want to be too hard on the media. But throughout that entire, 25 minutes, David Seymour never said anything disparaging about anyone based on their ethnicity or their race. He said nothing racist. He said nothing anti-Māori in that whole interview. And the things he has been called and the accusations levelled against him have been, I think, enough to make anyone a shoplifter. But he didn't. He remained logical and thoughtful. And he said, what I'm fighting here for is I'm not fighting against Māori or iwi. I am standing up for a principle of equality, a libertarian principle of equality. He is not trying to rewrite the Treaty of Waitangi, despite what TVNZ will tell you. And it is not about doing anyone down or taking anything away from anyone. It is about having a debate about issues which confront and, were you to believe the mainstream media, trouble most of our country. I made reference towards the end of that interview to Don Brash and the Orewa speech, and I thought it might, because I really am trying to look at this issue and engender the debate I believe and have believed for a long time we need to have. I suggested that maybe the genesis or part of the process of coming to this point now on this issue was a thing called the Orewa speech, delivered by the then, or relatively new, I think, leader of the National Party, Don Brash, Dr. Don Brash. And I can see the links in this. The reason I've been thinking about Orewa was Adam Dudding, a writer for the Sunday Star Times, published by Stuff. Adam Dudding wrote a massive article that dominated the front of it, the Sunday Star Times this weekend. 3 pages, 3 massive pages, going back to the Orewa speech. And basically, I think the piece, and Dudding's not a bad writer, it's in the blood, though he is, he's a bit of a people's poet. It basically said that all this terrible racism is all Don Brash's fault, and that's where it started. So I think Don should get a right of reply, and he joins us on the line now. Don, welcome to the platform. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Sean.
Orewa, when was that? How long ago was the Orewa speech?
Well, I think the article you mentioned in the Sunday Star Times referred to the fact that last Saturday was the 20th anniversary of that speech, 27th of January, 2004. Gosh,
20 years. What was it you were trying to say 20 years ago? What was the debate you were trying to start, or was it a cheap shot to try and get elected?
Well, no, it wasn't any of those things. I mean, the idea that Don Brash began the push for racial equality in New Zealand, of course, is garbage. Bill English, my predecessor as leader of the National Party, had a conference theme at the National Party that I attended where the main slogan across the platform was one law for all. Bill English announced in May 2003, before I became leader, that the next national government would scrap separate Maori electorates. So I didn't start anything at all, or at least I didn't think I was starting anything at all. I wrote a speech. I'd indicated when I became leader that I had 5 policy priorities, one of which was a push to acknowledge racial equality throughout the country. And I chose that particular theme for that particular speech because at the time the big issue on the plate was the Foreshore and Seabed Act, which Labour was pushing through. So it was a relevant speech at that time, and I thought I was making points which were perfectly obvious and well-established National Party principle.
It caused a storm, though, didn't it? A political storm.
Yes, it did, and to this day, I'm not entirely clear why. As I say, I was not starting anything new. People say it was because that when interviewed about it subsequently, I made it very clear I was dead serious about what I was saying, and I was, of course. I was interviewed by a number of people. The most memorable occasion I can think of was one by Kim Hill, who was a television program at 7 to 7:30 in the evening, and I was grilled for half an hour on whether I really meant what I said in the speech, and of course I said I did. And that was a major factor, I think, in promoting the speech in public awareness.
What was... you heard David, the interview with David earlier?
Yes, I did. I'm hugely impressed with the guy. He's one of the most courageous politicians in my lifetime. He's not dramatic. He doesn't shout and scream. He's just very matter-of-fact and to the point. And as he was with the end-of-life choice bill, he's got a principle. He wants to stick with it, and believes in it, and works hard at selling it.
Yeah. Okay. Is he enunciating? Is he basically saying, in spirit, the same thing you were 20 years ago?
I think he is. He's saying basically the treaty promised equality for all New Zealanders. And that's the fundamental principle. He's absolutely right.
All right. But we've had 20 years since you raised that issue. And if anything, I would say the concerns of the current interpretation of the principles have been exacerbated in that 20 years. We haven't made progress towards the sort of equality that you talked about in 20 years. In fact, it's got worse.
Oh, it's got markedly worse, I think. You referred, I think, in the interview with David to the Three Waters thing. I mean, that was a monstrosity which engendered a lot of the heat which drove Labour from power, I think. The idea that water infrastructure should be co-governed with 50-50 representation of Maori and non-Maori, to most New Zealanders does seem outrageous. I mean, there are a whole lot of other things. People have long resented the way the Resource Management Act gives special consultation rights to people of particular ancestry, separate Maori electorates, separate Maori wards. It goes on, and gradually, as you say, it's got worse, particularly much worse in the last 3 years.
Yeah. Don, you came close to winning the next election. And Ori was certainly, I think, did no problems for your profile. I was working in the media at the time, of course, and I watched the media collectively round on you and take a side on those issues. We had Nikki, although that was after the election, Nikki Hager's book. Did you think back then you were in a hostile media environment? You had a mainstream media and really alternate social media didn't exist then. That didn't like yes, your ideas.
That's certainly true. It's not, I think, as intense as it is now against David, but certainly the media was not on my side. That was for sure. Having said that, the public very much was on my side. As you mentioned, the National Party's popularity went from 28% to 45% in the very next Colmar-Brunton poll. It was such a huge jump that Colmar-Brunton redid the poll. They thought there must have been some mistake in their methodology. It seemed so preposterous. It subsequently went as high as 48%, I think, and for a time I was preferred Prime Minister over Helen Clark, which almost never happens to the opposition leader.
That's right.
So the public were very much on side with the message, and still are. As I think David indicated, support for the principles that we are all equal is very strong.
Yet, as I said, in 20 years, nothing has been done to politically enshrine that idea in New Zealand law. And actually, look, let me first deal with the news media. I think David was very, very politic and very diplomatic when I asked him about that. And as I said, I've been consistently in the news media since actually, a few years before your Orewa speech, actually. But I look now and I sit in a prime ministerial press conference and I see an open hostility. And in fact, I would say at present even, Don, that the mainstream media and largely the state media or state-funded media, one way or another, are more effective in opposing the sort of debate that you wanted to have 20 years ago and that David Seymour is having now than actual opposition politicians.
I think that's correct. I think it's absolutely correct. And he's got a tough fight on his hands, but as he acknowledged, the public are generally on his side. And I think finally that will carry the day.